Hey guys, guess what? The Hurricanes are making big moves. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. That's all I'm saying. Now, obviously, I'm going to get to the Hurricanes thing, the transactions they've done here in a minute, but this episode's not going to be your run of the mill type of Caniac Report episode. This is going to be an all news episode because I'm going to be basically recapping free agency day and obviously what the Hurricanes did in the last part of the episode because we have lots to talk about. First things first, though, I have a great partnership with SeatGeek. So if you feel like you want a discount on some tickets, well, good news for you. You can get some discount. You get $20 off of your first purchase if you use promo code Caniac Reports, all one word. And you can use it at a local venue near you, obviously, if they use SeatGeek. So, quite a few things have happened here recently. And the first things first is there's a new head coach hiring. The Dallas Stars have hired, obviously, Glenn Gulletson. And if you guys remember beforehand, they did fire their head coach and Peter DeBoer. The reasons was how he handled the whole goalie change in the playoffs. And you know what? We'll see how Glenn Gulletson does. It's been several years since he last coached. I believe it was the 2013-14 season with Calgary. So we'll see how he does as Dallas's new head coach. We also saw a trade happen recently between Utah and Buffalo. And for those of you who don't know, JJ Peterka, who was in Buffalo, he's no longer anymore. He's with Utah. He decided to be like, no, I don't want to be here anymore. So Buffalo kind of had to move on from JJ Peterka. So Buffalo moved him to Utah. So Utah, I think that's an excellent pickup. He's a great young player. He produced at least around 60 points. So that's a great, good winger they're having. I'm telling you, Utah, they're making a very, very good team. You have Peterka, you have Logan Cooley, you have Clayton Keller, Nick Schmaltz. This is a good, young forward group. Obviously, they had to trade a very good top four defenseman in Michael Kesselring, and they had to send out Josh Doan, which to me, when I saw Josh Doan's name in the picture, I was like, you know what? This is probably a sign of them saying, you know what? This is not Arizona anymore. This is Utah. So I thought that was a bit of a statement type of play by putting Josh Stone in that trade. Now I'm going to get on to all the signings in that have happened around the league here. Now, I'm not going to get through funny, I said all, but I'm not going to get through like the minor ones. I'm only going to focus on like the sort of big name players. Now, at the same time, I'm just going to let you guys know if you guys just want to hear me talk about the Hurricanes, there is a timestamp down below for those of you who are just listening, and I'll put a timestamp down below on YouTube as well. So, first things first, Andrew Mangiapane signs a 2-year, $3.6 million contract with the Oilers. I think he's a good depth piece. They kind of need some depth offensive pieces to complement the big name players, obviously, with Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Zach Hyman. I mean, you need to have that depth, and I thought that was a good depth piece. And with Mangiapane, he kind of had a rough season this past season with Washington, but we'll see how he does in Edmonton. The next player is John Klingberg. He signs a 1-year, $4 million contract with San Jose. The way I saw this was San Jose is like, you know what, we have tons of money. We got to get to the floor. So I think that's part of it. And also Klingberg, he's not that defenseman that he was several years ago. He's just not. But Maybe he can help be a part of that veteran group that can mentor some of those young guys in Macklin, Celebrini, Will Smith, and the others. So we'll see how John Kleinberg does with San Jose. Anaheim, they signed Mikael Granlund, who was the biggest center off the market, to a 3-year, $7 million contract. And to me, that's very interesting. I'll get to that later on a potential player that I think the Hurricanes could get. But just with the signing alone, Granlund, you know he's going to be a top 6 player. I think he's probably going to be the second line center behind the first line center in Leo Carlson. That's obviously Carlson is a player that is considered, I would say, a core player that they're trying to build around. Build around him and Cutter Gauthier. Obviously, you have a good player in Troy Terry already on the right side. So, Anaheim, I still think they're a pretty decent team, but again, I'm going to get to them later in this episode. And then the next signing, you have Jonathan Drouin. He signs a 2-year, $4 million contract with the Islanders. I thought this type of signing was a bit interesting because Drouin, I think he's a pretty good offensive forward. From what I've heard, I don't think he's really good on the defensive side of things. But what's interesting with the Islanders, I think what they're going to go for here, and I think the signing is kind of a sign, no pun intended there, probably things to come with the Islanders, because the Islanders, as we all know, they're a divisional team that has mainly played the exact same way for a long time. And I think they're going to, again, I could be wrong here, but I think the Islanders are going to try, and I'm not going to say they're going to go through a rebuild, but I think they're going to try and go through a change of the style of play. I could be wrong, but I think this signing is just the first to come of them trying to revamp the style of play. And the next signing is Cody Ceci. He signs a 4-year, $4.5 million contract with LA. Do I think that's a bit of an expensive contract? Yes, I do. And I'm going to actually put these two players together because LA also signed Brian Dumoulin to a 3-year, $4 million contract. And you can tell what LA is trying to do here is they're trying to shore up a huge loss on the blue line, because you had Vladislav Gavrikov, who played for them. He is known as a very, very good shutdown defenseman. He signed and decided to move on from LA. He signed a 7-year, $7 million contract with the Rangers. And obviously, with the Rangers signing him, we know that kind of completed the top 6, which left them wondering what do they have to do with Keandre Miller, which I will get to later in this episode. And the next player, I thought this was a pretty good signing for Utah. They signed the Stanley Cup winner player in Nate Schmidt to a 3-year, $3.5 million contract. And I think that's a very good deal for Utah. They get a pretty good defenseman on the back end for them. And I'm telling you, I really like Utah's team. I really, really do. The Seattle Kraken, they signed Ryan Lindgren to a 4-year, $4.5 million contract. Do I think that's an overpayment? I do as well, because while Ryan Lindgren a few years ago, he was a very, very good defenseman playing with Adam Fox, if you guys remember, with the Rangers. But his play has kind of dipped, so I do think that was a bit of an overpayment, and I don't really like the term either. The next player, this shocked me. I thought this was the biggest shock in free agency. If I had to label the biggest shock that happened in the whole league, it was Brock Besser coming back to Vancouver, because we all thought heading into free agency day that he was going to sign with a brand new team, but he didn't. And Brock Besser signs a 7-year, $7.3 million deal back with Vancouver. And it seems like his heart was always with Vancouver. From what I've heard, that's just how it was when it came to Brock Besser. So I'm sure Canuck fans are happy that he came back. And I'm sure they're like, you know what? Vancouver is a decent place to stay at. The next signing, I thought this was another actually overpayment, but Philadelphia signs Christian Dvorak to a 1-year, $5.4 million contract. The term I'm fine with. I really am fine with a 1-year contract. I don't think there's any risk with a 1-year contract. We're kind of regardless of who the player is. So it's not the term, but the money. 5.4, I think that's expensive for a player who's mainly gotten probably around 30 points in the past season. So I do think that's a bit of an overpayment, but you know what? I do wonder if I can't remember if Philadelphia was in cap trouble or not, but maybe that was a part of it. But we'll see how Christian Dvorak plays with Philadelphia. The next player, this player was probably the second best center on the market, and that is P.U. Sutter. He signs a 2-year, $4 million contract with the St. Louis Blues. So St. Louis, I thought they did pretty decent with signing Sutter to a 2-year, $4 million contract. We'll see how he does with St. Louis, but Sutter, he's a pretty decent player. He's gotten 40 to 40. We're probably around 45 to 50 points. Very, very good center. So St. Louis, I thought they kind of improved a little bit in free agency with that signing. And I think they're a team that could really make the playoffs next year. They really could be. Because now you have P.U. Sutter, you have Dylan Holloway, Robert Thomas. That is a good center core right there. The next two signings, these are signings with former Hurricane players. And Colorado, they signed Brent Burns to a 1-year, $1 million contract. And you know what? I am going to have a episode later on just saying my final goodbyes to the players that left the team. And even the amount isn't long, obviously, so I might get creative with that episode. But Brent Burns, man, I'm telling you, did he need to go? Yes, I think he needed to go. But at the same time, he is a player that, to me, one, he's obviously a Hall of Fame player. Brent Burns, when I saw that deal, I was like, you know what? Good for Brent Burns that he was able to continue his career in the NHL, because at age 40, you just don't know if teams are going to want you anymore. But obviously, there's a team in Colorado who wanted him. And I hope he has a great season with Colorado. I love Brent Burns to death, man. I think he has one of the best personalities that we've seen wear a Hurricane jersey. So congrats to Brent Burns for continuing his career, and I hope he has good fortune in Colorado. The next player, former Hurricane Dmitry Orlov, signs a 2-year, $6.5 million contract with San Jose. When I saw this deal, I was like, okay, San Jose obviously has lots of money to burn. They're able to afford it with Orlov. Do I think that's probably a bit of an overpayment? Maybe, but you know what? Colorado, they have the cap space, and he just adds to the veterans that they currently have, again, to try and help with the young guys and Celebrini, Will Smith, and William Eklund. It's just San Jose, I think they're going to be a team that's going to get better. Do I think that they compete for the playoffs? No, I do not. And one thing I will say here, because I've heard this term being thrown around a lot, and that term is that all these teams think that they're playoff contenders. And the only team that doesn't, that's going on a rebuild, it's Pittsburgh. And when I heard that, I'm like, and I heard that being thrown around a lot. And I was just like, you know what? I think there are a lot of teams that think that there are playoff contenders. I actually do. But at the same time, I think if you talk to Chicago's GM, or probably maybe even San Jose's GM, to some extent. Or Phil, no, I think Philadelphia's general manager uh, could be in that conversation too. But I think you have to look at the reality of some of these situations with these teams. Like, look at the Central Division, the Atlantic Division. These are divisions that are probably the toughest divisions in the NHL. I don't think if you talk to Chicago's general manager that he is convinced, be like, this team is a playoff contender through and through. I don't think he's going to say that. Now, he might have an optimistic approach. He might be like, you know what? I think this team could take a step forward. They could be a playoff team. And you know what? I'm fine with that type of response. But do I actually think all these general managers are saying, hey, we think we're a playoff team? No, because you got to focus on some reality on these teams like Chicago, like San Jose, like, I mean, Kevin Adams with Buffalo. Do I think on paper they're a good team? Yes. But look at their history. It's now like what? It feels like 100 years since they've made the playoffs. Like you gotta have some reality of the situation with some of these teams. And I think these general managers are smart enough to know the reality. There's, to me, a difference between delusional and being optimistic. I think as a general manager, you kind of need to be optimistic. That is part probably of the job. Because if you're not optimistic, you're not going to be making trades. You're not going to be looking to improve the team. But just to think that these general managers I just think Chicago is a perfect example just because you look at that division, I mean, Dallas, they're still a Stanley Cup contender. Colorado, Stanley Cup contender. Winnipeg, did they take a huge hit with Ehlers? Yes, absolutely. But I think they're still a good, better team compared to Chicago. So if I thought Chicago's general manager and they're like, yeah, we absolutely think we are a playoff team, then I'm just like, are you a bit delusional? Because, and again, I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm not. It's just one of those things where I'm just like, I think these drill managers, again, having that optimism's fine, but don't make it to where you sound delusional. So it's just that's my 2 cents on hearing that term a lot of like all these teams think they're playoff contenders. I'm just like, well, I'm sure some of these teams they're smart enough to know the reality of the situation that they're into too. And when you take into reality, they might not be playoff contenders. Might not be. I don't know Philadelphia is going to be a playoff contender. If I was the GM of Philadelphia, I'd be like, yeah, we're probably not playoff contender. Rangers are going to want to get back into the playoffs. Carolina still has probably increased their odds with the move that they made, and we'll get to them here in a second. New Jersey, obviously, they're still a decent team. It's just one of those things where I think these general managers, it's fine to have that optimism, but sometimes you have to have the reality of the situation. So those are my 2 cents. All right, gonna talk about the Hurricanes here. And if I didn't say it already, I hope you guys had a great 4th of July weekend. I know I did. So let's get down to it. I'm gonna leave the best probably for last here. So the first thing, the Hurricanes, obviously they signed Caden Primo. I can't remember if that was the first thing or not, but they signed Caden Primo to a 1-year deal worth the bare minimum of a salary, which is $775,000. And you know what? I think that is a good goalie, in the fact that you can play him in the NHL with quite a few games under his belt and also play him down in Chicago. He is that third goalie. He is the true embodiment of that third goalie. So Primo, I think that is a good signing for Carolina. Obviously, they traded for him first. They obviously got the contract done for a 1-year deal. And for those of you who do not know, his father is Hurricanes legend Keith Primo, who he played with the Hurricanes for quite a few seasons. He was very, very good. Obviously, he got traded, and you know what we got back in that trade? Rod Brindamore. So, just as Adam would call, I think Adam Gold would say, the circle of life or something. So, congrats to Caden Primo on a contract with the Hurricanes. I hope he becomes a good goalie. Hurricanes need all the goalies they can get. I'm not saying Anderson's been bad or anything. It's just they're going to need the assurance because at some point we know Anderson's going to get hurt. So the next goalie that they signed is a goalie from the KHL who had pretty good numbers in the KHL. And the KHL is obviously seen as a rivalry to the NHL. You know, there is some sort of a rivalry, and they're obviously, I would say, probably the second best league in terms of hockey in the world. So Amir Mitakov is signed to the same deal basically as Caden Primo. We'll see how he does. I think you're going to have Primo and Mitakov be mainly the two goalies down in Chicago. And I think that kind of shows their faith in Ruslan Kaziev, who didn't really have that good of a season down in Chicago. So I think the goaltending down in Chicago is going to get better. And when goaltending gets good in Chicago, that gives us some relaxation knowing that, okay, at least they're playing pretty good in Chicago. Hopefully they can play pretty good here in the NHL because we know there's going to be an injury coming at some point here in the regular season. And another player that we signed, which I was like, yes, because if you guys remember one of my previous episodes on expiring contracts, I predicted Tyson Jost to sign with the Hurricanes. And you know what? They did. The exact same deal as Primo and Miftakov. And it is a 1 year, $775,000 contract. And you know what? I like Jost. The way I view these type of signings is, you know what? Great. You can never have too much depth because you're going to have injuries. Is it a long season? It's going to be even longer once the new CBA kicks in. And again, you're going to need that depth. I think Jost is an excellent piece going forward. I think he's probably going to be that player that is going to play in Chicago. He's kind of going to be what I call like an in-betweener type of player. I think he's going to be jumping around from the AHL to the NHL because I do wonder, I think Jankowski's probably going to be that 13th forward for the Hurricanes. And ideally, that's kind of where you want Jankowski to be. I think Jankowski can be a fourth-line player, but I think with the signing of Jost, I think that's their plan. I could be wrong, but I think that's their plan, is to have Jost kind of be that player that is in the middle between playing games in the AHL to playing games in the NHL. And I think the 13th forward is going to be Jankowski, even though he can play in a fourth line minutes, basically. So, July 1st. Oh boy, the Hurricanes. Well, one thing that the Hurricanes did make news on, which I was so happy about because I have said this multiple times, in the fact that once Stankoven is eligible for an extension, you need to extend him. And you know what? They did. They signed him to an 8-year, $6 million contract. I'm just going to give a clap right here. So happy they signed him to that extension. I think that is a great deal because even though there might be some people that don't know what his potential is on this team, I think Stankoven has the potential to at least be close. I would say at least be close to a point per game type of player. Do I think he becomes a point per game type of player? Probably not. But I think he can be probably a 75 to 80 point player because I think he can be that good. And I think we've seen him be that good because he has a relentless motor on, it seems like it's on his skates, and he has this thing that I call like the sixth sense because he is so smart with the puck. He knows when to shoot. He knows when to pass. He knows when to handle the puck. It's just so well done when you see his play on the ice. So I think that's going to be a bargain of a contract. The next thing the Hurricanes did, which was big too, they traded a conditional first round pick. So it's going to be the better between Dallas and Carolina. I believe if one of them is in, because it's top 10 protected, if one of those picks is within the top 10, I do think Carolina trades the pick that's outside of the top 10 if they're in a situation like that to the Rangers. But obviously, conditional first round pick because they have two this year with Dallas and Carolina. You have a second round pick in 2026 and Scott Morrow sent to the Rangers for Keandre Miller. And Miller is a 25-year-old. I think he's a top 4 defenseman. And to me, what's great is that he is a big physical guy. He can lay hits, and that is absolutely needed for this team. Now, the contract, he was an RFA win, obviously, at the time they traded for him, but they eventually came to a sign and trade because you can tell the Hurricanes wanted Keandre Miller. They're probably thinking of offer sheeting him. In fact, they were even thinking of offer sheeting Evan Bouchard from Edmonton, but obviously Edmonton did sign Bouchard to a 4-year, $10.5 million contract, I believe. But Keandre Miller, he received a lot of criticism this past season for the Rangers. And I would argue he's probably received the most criticism just because the Rangers, boy, it was a season where they started really good and then they just bombed. They fell out of the playoffs hard. And a lot of the criticism was toward Keandre Miller. With that being said, Carolina is known to get defensemen, and I would say a great comparison is Brady Shea because Brady Shea was once a Ranger too. They are known for getting defensemen that can play excellent in their system, and it does come to fruition. Think of Shane Gostisbehere. Think of Sean Walker. I think Walker is probably a better example just because I think he's played very well for the Hurricanes. So it just seems like whatever defenseman Carolina gets, they play well. It takes time. So obviously, I would say probably with Miller, it's going to take him probably the same amount of time like it did for Brent Burns, like it did for Dmitry Orlov. It's going to take him probably time to adjust to Brendan Moore's system. But Miller, I think, obviously, he's on an 8-year contract worth $7.5 million. Do I think that's probably a little bit pricey right now? Maybe. But with the cap going up, I think that is going to be a very good contract based on obviously how he does. And I think Miller, I think he could be a defenseman that could be very, very good. I am going to have an episode this Friday be on the focus of all the different type of combinations that we could see on the blue line, because I think there's an argument to be made for lots of different pairings. And that's going to be an episode I'm going to have on Friday because with the signing of Miller, you have more left-handed defensemen than you need, but still, I think he is a top 4 defenseman. Again, I'll get to Friday's episode and explain to you guys what I feel is going to happen, even though I could be wrong. But at the same time, Hurricanes I would say it's a good problem for the Hurricanes to have because they have, I would argue, you look at their defense right now, 5 top 4 defensemen, and then you have defensemen in the kitchen who obviously probably not a top 4 defenseman yet, but he has the potential to, I would say, be a top 2 defenseman. But obviously, right now with Nikishkin, he's you can tell he's that sixth defenseman. And I do think that's going to change. I think he's going to get a lot better. Now, the Hurricanes also did on the same day, they signed Mike Riley to a 1-year, $1.1 million contract. I think that is a great signing considering they need depth on D. We saw, especially in the playoffs, what it's like to not have good depth on D. And I'm not trying to criticize Morrow or Nikishin. They were thrown into the fire, obviously, but it, it just shows. And at some point, I do agree at the same time that at a certain time there's only so much depth you can cover for so many injuries, but the injuries, they're probably going to happen. So you need to probably have, I would say, probably 2 or 3 depth defensemen probably ready come playoff time. So I think Mike Riley is an excellent signing. I think he's a player that can play on your third pair, honestly, at times. But I think that just shows how good depth the Hurricanes have, knowing that they have a guy in Mike Riley that can play probably third pair type of minutes. So, again, I think that's a great depth signing. They need it. I wouldn't be shocked if they signed another depth defenseman because, again, you can never have too much depth in this league, especially if you're a team that's vying for the Stanley Cup. So, obviously, free agency, the biggest player coming into free agency was Nikolaj Ehlers because you had Marner signing with Vegas. I have my own opinions on that, obviously. But Marner signs with Vegas to a $12 million contract. So all the eyes were on Nikolaj Ehlers. And coming into free agency, I think everybody knew, if you're keeping up with it, that the Hurricanes were the front runners. But knowing us Hurricanes fans, we know at the same time, like, are we actually going to get him? Are we going to get this guy or not? And I think because this dragged out quite a bit. He did not sign on July 1st. In fact, Elliot Friedman even said on July 1st he expected Ehlers to take at least a couple days before he makes his decision. But I think us Canes fans kind of knew, as the longer this dragged on, the more worried we got. And I'll admit, I was worried. I really was. I was like, I don't know if Carolina's going to sign him just because of how much time Ehlers is taking. Well, on July 3rd, he made his decision, and the Hurricanes signed him to a 6-year contract worth $8.5 million to Ehlers. And when I saw that we signed him, reported by Kevin Weeks first, I was really, really happy. But it did take some time for at least me to realize what the contract was. And that's usually how I judge these signings, is based on the contract. So I was actually expecting Ehlers to get probably a little bit more. 8.5, I think that is a bargain of a contract. And to me, it's not just that. It's not the monetary value, but the term as well. I would have been fine with 7 years for Ehlers. I really would have. But 6 years, I think that is perfect, to be honest. And not every player you need to sign to the max term. And I probably wouldn't advise a team probably to give max term contracts to every player. Heck, I think sort of a good example of that is the New York Islanders. But obviously, I think that's part of the reason why they got rid of Lou Lamoriello. But Ehlers, 6 years, 8.5, I think that is a almost perfect of a contract, if it's not perfect already. So, excellent signing. And what this means, because I think Carolina still has more to do. And I think they need more to do. And I think they realize that there's more to do. Because now with the signing of Ehlers, that means that you have more capital now. Because coming into free agency day, Hurricanes already had a full roster. With the signing of Ehlers, you now have more players than there are roster spots. And to be honest, with $10.9 million left in cap space, I think they need to do something. And I think that need is obviously at second line center. Now, there have been rumors, and this is why I'm circling back to Anaheim here, of Mason McTavish. When they signed Mikael Granlund to a pretty long deal, I think that's an indicator saying McTavish could be traded. Because with that signing, you're basically saying, okay, Leo Carlson, Mikael Granlund, you are 1 and 2 centers. McTavish, he had a pretty good season with Anaheim. He's a young centerman. He's big. He got over 50 points. And to me, I'm like, you know what? As a Hurricanes fan, I'm kind of like that meme of, I believe, that SpongeBob being, if you guys have seen Squidward looking down, and I would write Kane on there. That formed in me when I saw McTavish possibly being on the block, like Kane. And you know what? I think if you look more into it, because I looked at from Anaheim's perspective on this too. You look at how their roster is currently constructed. With the addition of Mikael Granlund, does McTavish become a bit of an expendable player? Maybe. Do they still want to have him on the team? Probably they do. But you know what's interesting is they barely have any players to play the right wing. Probably the best player and the only player they have on the right wing is Troy Terry. Well, you guys know what we have? A lot of players that can play the right wing. And I would say with this signing, I would not be shocked. I think there's going to be more to it, obviously, in the trade, but I wouldn't be shocked if Carolina decided to get a guy like Mason McTavish. I'm not saying that it's going to be him. I would love it for it to be him. But I could see Carolina being like, you know what? The principle of the trade is going to be McTavish coming to us. You guys get also a young player in Jackson Blake. Because I do think with that signing of Ehlers, I really wonder if Jackson Blake gets traded. I love the guy. I really, really do. But Jackson Blake resembles a lot of the players that we currently have in the fact that he is a small, young player. So, with that being said, again, I think he's a great player. I really, really do. I'm not saying he's bad. He proved to be very, very good this past season. Obviously, I think in the playoffs, he probably played too much. I would argue he probably got played a little bit too much. But with Blake, what Anaheim would be getting if Carolina made that trade, basically it's a young player for a young player. And I think both are kind of needs for Anaheim's sake and for Carolina's sake. Now, I think it's going to acquire more to get Mason McTavish. I think you're probably going to have to add in a prospect or a pick. Heck, I wouldn't be surprised if they package KK with Blake. And this draws to another thing too. If the Hurricanes go into the playoffs with KK as their second line center, I can almost guarantee you they are not going to win a cup. And I think that shows that this team desperately, and I really do think they are looking for a second line center. I don't think they're done. Just look at their cap space on Puckpedia. But you cannot win a Stanley Cup with the way the center court is right now. I think Aho, he's an excellent center. I know there is some debate whether he's actually a first line center or a second line center. You have Aho, and then you have 3 tiers below him, everybody else. I love Stahl. I think I'll probably all the players. His work ethic is probably the best in terms of our centermen. I wish Aho probably had that work ethic that Jordan Stahl brings, but Jordan Stahl, he's not a second line center. KK, not a second line center. Mark Jankowski, he's not a second line center. So that's something they need to address, obviously. Now, there are certain people out there that think that, well, maybe you can put Seth Jarvis at second line center. And, you know what? I agree with what Adam Gold said. And basically, I think that's mainly the reason why is because, like, Adam Gold is the closest thing we have probably to the Carolina Hurricanes. Like, he speaks with Brendan Moore almost on a daily basis. And with him saying Brendan Moore never considered Jarvis to play at second line center, it's not going to happen. It's just not. So they need to trade for one. And I think there's an opportunity there with Mason McTavish. Now, knowing the Hurricanes, they're probably not going to get him, but they'll probably find a second line center from some other team. And we're all just going to be jumping on the streets just because we know Tulsky is very cerebral with his moves. And I'm going to end with my thoughts on Tulsky on this. I know I'm going probably way over time more than usual. But Tulsky, you know what? He was a general manager. He was a new general manager coming in last season. And my thoughts on the whole Rantanen trade, even though it was, I think, it was not a good risk. But regardless, I like the risk because I think part of being a general manager, you have to make bold moves, and he did. Did it work out? No, it did not. But if you look at it, you gave up Martin Hs and Jack Drury and a couple of picks for Logan Stankoven, Keandre Miller, Taylor Hall, and you still have a first round pick left over. You have a third round pick left over. And you also brought in Ehlers with only the expense of money. Bravo to Eric Tulsky right there. Bravo. And I can tell you this, Tulsky, I think he has done an excellent job coming out of that Rantanen trade. Do I still think we probably could have gotten more? Maybe. But obviously it took time, obviously. Us Canes fans probably needed to be patient with Tulsky because Tulsky's probably like, I'm brewing something here. It's going to take time, but it finally sort of came to fruition. Now, again, I don't think the Canes are done. I think Tulsky has more moves up his hand. And you know what? He's a smart GM. And I think so far he's done an excellent job. There's one more move that the Hurricanes, I think, need to do, then they're good. And it's that second line center. So that's it for this episode. It definitely gone on pretty long, but man, it was worth it. And this Canes team, I do think they are better now than they were heading out of last year's playoffs. So I will see you guys Friday.